The following game is between A. Rubinstein and Alexander Alekhine. Rubinstein had white. Rubinstein starts out with pawn to queen 4, knight to king, bishop 3. And they start out here, and Black plays a queen's indent. Alekhine plays a bishop to knight 5 check, and he claims he would have been better off just playing bishop to king 2 here. But his opponent plays knight to queen 2, so Alekhine had thought bishop to queen 2 was better. This is good enough to equalize. A good maneuver also was rook to king 1 and bishop to king bishop 1. Black plays pawn to queen rook 3, and so Black expands on the queen side. Alekhine says that this pawn to bishop 4 here is the correct way to play it. That pawn to queen rook 4 would allow pawn to knight 5 and would have been the wrong way to play this. Pawn takes, pawn takes, pawn takes. Bishop takes pawn. At this point, Rubinstein just plays bishop to knight 2, queen knight to queen 2, knight to king 5, knight takes knight, bishop takes knight. Now Alekhine says on this move here, he says this diversion is by no means as harmless as it looks. White loses the game chiefly because he underestimates its importance. He can't play bishop to knight 2 because of queen to knight 3. So he plays bishop to queen bishop 3. Alekhine plays rook to knight 1. If he had played queen to knight 3, White could have just played pawn to king 3. The text move prepares the eventual advance of the queen's pawn. White plays rook to knight 1. Although this move cannot be considered a decisive mistake, it certainly facilitates the opponent's plans. Unsatisfactory would have been pawn to rook 3, knight takes pawn, rook takes knight, queen to knight 4, knight to bishop 1, bishop takes rook check, king takes bishop, pawn takes pawn, and so forth to Black's advantage. But by continuing pawn takes pawn, bishop takes queen pawn, and knight to king 4, White still could have obtained an even game. So Alekhine here plays pawn to queen 5. Now White does make a mistake. White plays the move rook takes bishop. Rubinstein does not foresee the surprising 18th move of Black, and consequently will find himself in a material disadvantage. The only possibility here was to play bishop to knight 4, and then queen bishop takes bishop, king takes bishop, queen to bishop 2, reaching a position which would be in Black's favor too, but hardly in a decisive way. So now, after rook takes bishop, rook takes rook, bishop takes rook, and now here comes Alekhine's famous move that he had prepared for this line. He plays knight to king bishop 3. This is a pseudo-sacrifice. Black forces the win of at least a pawn with an overwhelming position. Of course, ineffective would have been the immediate pawn takes bishop because of knight to king 4. Now here, Rubinstein plays king takes knight. Other moves were no better. If queen to rook 1, pawn takes bishop, knight to knight 3, knight to knight 5 check, knight takes bishop, queen to queen 5 check. If bishop to rook 5, knight takes queen, bishop takes queen, pawn to queen 6 check, pawn to king 3, knight takes pawn, with an easy win for Black in both cases. So Rubinstein plays king takes knight, pawn takes bishop check, Or if you place king to king 1, pawn takes knight, queen takes pawn, queen to knight 3 with a rapidly winning attack. Pawn to king 3, pawn takes knight, king to king 2, queen to knight 1, bishop to bishop 3, rook to queen 1, queen to knight 1, queen to queen 3, gaining the square queen knight 5 for the bishop. Pawn to queen rook 4, pawn to bishop 4, rook to queen 1, bishop to knight 5, queen to bishop 2, queen to bishop 4, king to bishop 2, pawn to queen rook 4, bishop to king 2, pawn to knight 4, bishop to queen 3, and now Alekhine plays pawn to bishop 5. If bishop takes pawn check, king to rook 1, queen to king 4, then queen takes pawn check, king to knight 2, pawn to bishop 6 check, king to rook 3, queen to king 7, queen to knight 6, pawn to knight 5 check, king to rook 4, bishop to king 2 check, king to rook 5, and then queen takes pawn check wins. And so at this point, Black resigned. And I'll give you the other line that he had said. If bishop takes pawn check, this did not happen in the game. King to rook 1, queen to rook king 4, queen takes pawn check, king to knight 2, pawn to bishop 6 check, king to rook 3, queen to king 7, queen to knight 6, pawn to knight 5 check, king to rook 4, bishop to king 2 check, king here, queen takes pawn check, and wins. Okay, that's it for this game.